Somewhere north of the 74th parallel, wind scrapes across a coastal plain of bare gravel ridges. There is no tree line here, no shelter of any kind. A man in a high-visibility survey vest kneels beside an exposed sediment outcrop, pencil moving steadily across the pages of a field notebook. He is focused, unhurried, a professional doing work he has done 1,000 times before. 400 meters behind him, a pale shape moves low against the horizon. It advances in a straight line, steady and deliberate, closing the distance without pause. These are the last 60 seconds before contact. The geologist has not yet looked up. The story begins several hours earlier at a seasonal field camp on the archipelago of Novaya Zemlya in the Russian Arctic, late July. The camp operates under the auspices of a government-funded geological mapping program run by VSEGEI, the All-Russian Geological Research Institute, headquartered in St. Petersburg. The work is methodical and unglamorous. Teams of geologists fan out across designated survey corridors, documenting rock formations, collecting samples, updating stratigraphic records that, in some cases, have not been revised in decades. Among the senior researchers on this rotation is Sergei Anatolyevich Turbanov. He is 48 years old. He has logged more than 15 Arctic field seasons across Siberia and the Barents region. His assignment this summer is straightforward, surveying Permian-age limestone formations along a stretch of the western coastline for an updated stratigraphic atlas. It is the kind of task that fills notebooks and hard drives, but rarely makes headlines. But before we get into what those updated protocols actually looked like, if this kind of detailed breakdown is what you come to YouTube for, the research behind each case, the environmental forensics, the lessons buried in the details, do me a favor and hit subscribe. And if this one's already got you thinking differently about solo fieldwork in predator country, a like genuinely helps more people find these analyses. That's all I ask. Now, back to what changed after Turbanov's death, and why the new expedition rules went further than most people expected. Turbanov is experienced, physically capable, and entirely familiar with the risks of working in polar bear country. The camp reflects that familiarity. It is equipped with a bolt-action rifle, flare pistols, and electric bear fences ringing the perimeter. These are standard precautions for any Arctic field station, and the team observes them. Turbanov is not careless. He is not naive. He has spent more seasons in landscapes like this one than most researchers half his age. On the morning in question, Turbanov sets out alone on foot. His destination is a survey point roughly 3 kilometers south of the camp perimeter, a limestone outcrop along the coast that he intends to map and sample. He carries a flare pen, a handheld radio, and his mapping kit. He does not take the rifle. That single decision will matter. But to understand why, the viewer needs to understand what is happening on Novaya Zemlya's western coast in midsummer. Not in the camp, but across the tundra beyond it. By late July, the sea ice that polar bears depend on for hunting seals has retreated far offshore. The bears that remain on land are stranded. Caloric opportunities on the tundra are scarce. No seal breathing holes, no ice edges to patrol. A male polar bear in this condition is lean, restless, and hyperphagic, a term biologists use for the state of compulsive hunger that sets in when an animal is burning through its fat reserves faster than it can replenish them. This is not the cautious, lumbering scavenger that most people picture when they think of polar bears. This is an apex predator running a caloric deficit. And on open tundra, any warm-blooded target that moves registers not as a curiosity, but as prey. What follows from that biological reality is a hunting behavior that separates polar bears from nearly every other large predator a person might encounter on foot. A grizzly that perceives a threat will often bluff charge, ears back, jaw popping, breaking off at the last moment. It reacts defensively. A polar bear that has decided to hunt does something altogether different. It approaches in a straight line, body low, closing distance at a walk without pausing, without deviating. There is no bluster, no warning. If the target does not detect the approach and respond aggressively before the bear reaches roughly 100 meters, the window for deterrence narrows sharply. Inside that threshold, the probability of a successful predatory rush climbs with every step. Sergei Turbanov is now 3 kilometers from camp, alone, on flat and featureless ground. He does not have the rifle. He has a single-shot flare pen and a radio. And somewhere on the gravel plain behind him, the wind is carrying his scent northeast, towards something that has already begun to move. The wind is the first thing working against him. It pushes from the southwest, from behind his crouched position at the outcrop, carrying his scent out across the coastal plain to the northeast. Anything downwind with a functioning nose knows exactly where he is. But the same current that advertises his presence steals sound from the opposite direction. Whatever moves toward him from the northeast moves in silence. Footfalls on gravel, the steady displacement of air by a large body. All of it dissolved into the white noise of Arctic wind before it reaches his ears. The ground between Turbanov and the open plain offers nothing. No ridge, no boulder field, no creek cut or raised embankment. It is gravel, flat, unbroken, stretched to the horizon like a table. A man standing upright at the outcrop can see a long way, but a man crouched against a rock face with his eyes on a notebook cannot see at all. And there is nowhere to go, no structure to put between himself and a threat, no elevation to climb, no vehicle parked within sprinting distance. The landscape is open in every direction, which sounds like visibility, but functions as exposure. These are the factors, and they deserve to be named plainly. Solo travel without a firearm, wind direction funneling scent toward the predator, and silence toward the prey. Flat topography that eliminates early visual detection and removes any option for refuge. Deep task focus, the kind of absorption that comes naturally when a geologist with 15 field seasons leans into work he has done hundreds of times before. No single factor here is a mistake. None of them would raise an eyebrow during a pre-season safety briefing. Experienced Arctic researchers travel solo to nearby survey points. They leave the rifle when the walk is short. They crouch over their work because that is how the work gets done. The ordinariness of each element is precisely what makes the combination lethal. Every variable is normal. The sum is not. The bear closes from the northeast. It moves at a walk across the open gravel, steady, linear, unhurried. This is not a charge. This is not a startled animal reacting to a surprise encounter. This is the straight-line stalk described by polar bear researchers, the deliberate approach of a predator that has already committed. Each stride eats 5 or 6 meters of distance, and the distance is shrinking in a way that would be obvious to anyone watching from above, but is invisible to the man with his back turned and his pencil moving. At roughly 80 meters, something breaks through. A shift at the edge of peripheral vision, a shape that does not belong to the gravel. Turbanov looks up. He stands. 80 meters. For a polar bear at a full sprint, that distance closes in seconds. He pulls the flare pen and fires. The single shot arcs wide, a bright streak that angles off the bear's flank and skitters across the gravel. The bear does not stop. Turbanov reaches for a second cartridge and finds none. The flare pen is a single-shot deterrent, and the single shot is spent. He keys the handheld radio. The transmission that reaches camp is brief and broken. Colleagues later report hearing one word clearly: bear, followed by static. That is the last anyone hears from him. What happens next happens fast. The distance between 80 meters and zero collapses in the time it takes to draw a breath, and the narrator owes the man at the center of this story the restraint of not lingering on what followed. The attack occurs within seconds of that radio call. It is not a prolonged struggle. It is the terminal moment of a stalk that began long before Turbanov ever looked up. Camp personnel mobilize immediately. They load the rifle, mount the ATV, and drive south across the gravel at full speed. 20 minutes later, they reach the survey point. Turbanov has already sustained fatal injuries. The bear is still nearby. Warning shots drive it off, and emergency wildlife teams are dispatched to track and locate the animal in the hours that follow. 20 minutes. In almost any other emergency, 20 minutes is fast. Here, it is an eternity measured after the fact, a gap that was sealed the moment the radio went to static. But the weight of this story does not end with a man lost on the tundra. What this incident exposed about protocols, about deterrence, about the assumptions that experienced programs carry into the field unchallenged, is what forced Russian Arctic operations to change. And understanding what it teaches matters to anyone who has ever walked, or plans to walk, where polar bears hunt. Sergei Turbanov survived 15 Arctic field seasons. He knew the tundra, knew the bears, knew the protocols. And he was dead within seconds of his only radio transmission, on terrain he had walked before, following patterns he had trusted for years. The question now is not what happened. It is why experience alone was not enough. The answer began to take shape in the seasons that followed. Russian Arctic expedition authorities reviewed the incident and tightened field protocols across every government-funded survey program operating above the 70th parallel. 3 changes were immediate and non-negotiable. First, a mandatory 2-person minimum for any off-camp traverse. No exceptions for distance, familiarity, or seniority. Second, mandatory long-arm carry. Every person leaving the camp perimeter would carry a rifle or shotgun loaded with slugs, regardless of how short the excursion. Third, multi-shot deterrent devices replacing single-flare pens. The single-shot flare that Turbanov fired and missed was retired from approved equipment lists. In its place, bear bangers, pen launchers with multiple cartridges, devices that could be deployed in rapid sequence at close range without reloading. These were not arbitrary corrections. Each one addressed a specific failure point, and when you map them against the accepted safety framework for operating in polar bear country, the logic becomes painfully clear. The framework is sometimes called the polar bear triangle: awareness, deterrence, and retreat. 3 legs, each one independent, each one essential. The model holds that if all 3 are functioning, a human being on polar bear terrain has a defensible margin of safety. But the model also holds, and this is the part that matters, that no single leg is sufficient on its own. Redundancy is the point. When one leg fails silently, the other 2 must absorb the load. When 2 fail, the third almost certainly cannot hold. In Turbanov's case, all 3 collapsed. Awareness was the first to go. He was alone. One pair of eyes focused downward on sediment layers with no second observer scanning the horizon. The wind blew from behind him, carrying his scent northeast toward the approaching bear, while pushing every sound the animal made away from his ears. On flat, featureless gravel with no elevation, visual detection depended entirely on someone looking in the right direction at the right moment. No one was. The bear closed 400 meters to 80 without being seen. Deterrence failed next. A single flare pen, 1 shot, no reload, is not a deterrent against a committed polar bear at close range. It is a gesture. Turbanov fired and missed. There was no second cartridge. There was no rifle on his back, no shotgun, no bear banger. A properly equipped traverse would have looked different. Two people maintaining 360-degree visual scanning, a long arm within arm's reach, multi-shot pyrotechnics staged for immediate deployment. Layered deterrence designed to function even when the first attempt fails. Turbanov had none of that. He had one chance, and the chance went wide. Retreat was never an option. Open tundra, no vehicle within 3 kilometers, no structure, no elevated ground, no defensible position of any kind. A polar bear at full charge covers ground at roughly 40 kilometers per hour. A human cannot outrun that on gravel. Retreat requires something to retreat to: a vehicle left running nearby, a hardened shelter, a ridgeline that buys time. On that coastal plain, there was nothing between Turbanov and the bear but flat earth. And here is the part that resists easy lessons. Turbanov was not reckless. He was not careless, not cavalier, not new to this. He was a 48-year-old senior geologist with more than 15 seasons in the Arctic. He was physically fit. He knew the bears were there. He carried a deterrent. He carried a radio.
He followed patterns that had kept him alive across Siberia and the Barents for the better part of 2 decades. The failure was not personal. It was systemic, a set of conditions that had always been present but had never aligned in exactly this configuration before. A kneeling figure on a gravel ridge, a pencil moving across a notebook, and behind him, 400 meters out, a pale shape moving low against the horizon. Unhurried, deliberate, closing the distance in a straight line. He does not look up. The Arctic does not punish recklessness alone. It punishes ordinary confidence when a single variable shifts. Sergei Turbanov did almost everything his experience told him was sufficient. The bear only needed one gap.